Right, I think we are ready to start. Are we good in the room? All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Mandaha. I'm the Media Relations Manager here at the CSIR. I would like to welcome you all to this media briefing today. The media briefing will focus on the statistics that we release annually on load shedding. We'll also look at how that impacts the water cuts in the country. We have two of our experts who will be unpacking this topic today. So we'll start with the presentations. The presentation will be done by Mr. Warwick Pierce, who is our principal researcher. He will focus on the stats and the load shedding report. Then we'll also have Mr. Odwa Badi, who is our senior civil engineer, who will mainly focus on the impact of load shedding on water in the country. So immediately after that, we'll take question and answer. Colleagues, let's mute our mic. Thank you very much. So immediately after the two presentations, then we'll take questions and answer session. So colleagues, all of you who are joining us online, good morning once again. So I would like to now call Mr. Warwick Pierce, who is joining us online to kickstart the media briefing. And then immediately after that presentation, then we'll have Mr. Odwa Badi, who will take us through his presentation. Over to you, Warwick. Thank you so much.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just sharing screen. I'll be with you shortly. It is confirmed that the screen is visible. David?
Yes, we can see Warwick. Please go ahead. And please be on camera because we've got our television colleagues. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Warwick Pierce from Energy Centre or Energy Systems. We do work around energy planning on a national, more of a regional basis. Hence the reason why I'm giving this presentation. So we've been asked to talk about the electricity crisis in South Africa. So what we're doing is we're taking a point of view of saying, well, what are the numbers saying to us? We're not going to be providing our opinions, but what is this sort of a robust scientific analysis saying to us? So just before we start the presentation, we obviously know that we're in an electricity crisis. So the news is not particularly positive or so please don't shoot the messenger. But it's good that we at least look into these, have these discussions. So the agenda for today, and I think we said around about 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll be going through it very slowly. It's not going to be particularly technical. This is going to be talking about the electricity crisis, how we got here. So that's the second agenda point. And then sort of where are we? We know we're in a crisis. Some people have used the analogy of a gap. We have a gap in terms of supply and demand. The question is, how wide is that gap and what's happening with that gap? So for today, we want to just inform and assist decision makers to make smarter choices. This is our sort of overarching goal at the Energy Systems or Energy Center at the CSIR. We're working with various government departments and other research institutions looking at the electricity crisis, around energy planning, what can be done, what are the options. So this field is very active, obviously, based on the severity of the crisis. So for today, we want to present data and analysis to provide a scientific basis for the discussion of the ongoing, and unfortunately that second word is very important, worsening electricity crisis. So I think government and specifically ESCOM has been quite transparent and open about the fact that we're in an electricity crisis. I think the thing that hasn't maybe been discussed that well is that the crisis is actually worsening. And that's what we've seen throughout with load shedding from last year. So when we talk about the crisis, we normally refer to load shedding, but sometimes it's good to sort of look at it from a helicopter view or get a bit more of an ecosystem point of view to say, well, so we apply systems thinking. And just around systems thinking, there's sort of two types of feedback loops. So any student that's done systems dynamics will look at two feedback loops, and they generally give you this introduction of the bunny population. So we know that with the population of bunnies is increased with the amount of births. So the more bunnies you have, more the population increases. The more population you have, the more births you have. So this is what you would call a reinforcing loop on the left. And on the right, obviously, if there was nothing else to it, then you would just have an increase in population and it would explode exponentially. But we know that there's a reinforcing loop because as the increase of population, there's an increase in deaths. Deaths reduce the population. This is what we have called a balancing loop. And I know this seems very arbitrary to the discussion we have today, but it's actually very important because unfortunately, we're on the left. We're in a reinforcing loop currently with the electricity crisis. And I'll explain on the next slide how we got there or why. So the ESI or electricity supply industry in South Africa, we know that we're in a crisis with load shedding. The first thing to understand is that load shedding is used as a proxy. It's a very good proxy to see how bad it is. But we should really note that it's a symptom. So load shedding is a symptom to the problem. It's not the source. The actual problem is that supply is not able to meet demand, or more recently, reliably meet demand. So the source, if we try to isolate the source, a few years ago, it was first a capacity shortage. So we didn't have enough megawatts or enough generation capacity in the system. Then we've moved more recently to now capacity and an energy shortage. So it's not just about our megawatts, it's also megawatt hours. So just looking at this diagram at the bottom here, we're starting with a capacity shortage, which then leads to what we call sort of keep the lights on at all costs. So you sweat your existing capacity. So the ESCOM fleet is pushed as hard as possible to keep the lights on, to try to reduce the amount of load shedding, to reduce the amount of diesel that we need to burn. This unfortunately then would lead to inadequate maintenance or not frequent enough maintenance, which then leads to increased breakdowns. And we'll see a few slides on where we've actually gone quantified that in terms of how much is increased breakdowns. ESCOM calls it unplanned maintenance. The problem with increased breakdowns is you don't know when it's going to happen. So it's obviously impossible, very difficult to plan for. So this then leads us to reduced availability. So even the megawatts that we have on the system right now are not available or reliably available, which then which causes an electricity crisis, which we're seeing directly as load shedding, and this also feeds back in terms of capacity shortage. So this is again what we've got a problem here is we're trying to avoid load shedding by sweating the assets, by maybe not doing adequate maintenance, and this increased breakdowns is also not just about inadequate maintenance or reduced maintenance, also the aging fleet of the coal power stations in South Africa. So this is why we refer to as saying we're in a reinforcing loop. So what's important to understand is that significant intervention is required. Without significant intervention, things will continue to get worse. But fortunately, we're seeing governments step in and making plans. So just sort of stepping back again, what we're seeing here is this is gigawatts. So this is the amount of generation capacity from 1965. You'll see on the right here all the coal power stations that have been put online from Komati all the way down to Kusile. And extremely impressive in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, the Eskom was building multiple, very big coal power stations at the same time. It's from an engineering point of view, this is quite a feat. But from sort of 1990 and specifically 2000s, no more new builds in terms of the coal power station. So we're seeing this sort of flat lining, and then this is Kusile and Medupi sort of really optimistically shown here. This dark black line that you're seeing is the 35 gigawatts. So that's the peak demand that's required for the national peak demand. So when Eskom sort of got to make plans, they say, well, we need to at least cover 35 gigawatts. So that's the black line that we're seeing here. But which is clearly to note is that we're currently in an electricity crisis, and we're around about this point, 2022, the end of 2022, 2023. But even in 5 to 10 years' time, we're sort of talking about this dip on the other side of the mountain. So if everything stays exactly the same now, the electricity crisis will get significantly worse. So the same graph, just a different scale. Now all the coal power plants are shown as a dark gray, and then we have the other firm capacity, which is our nuclear, Kuberg, our local hydro, hydro, local and international. Then we've also got our peakers, which is burning diesel, and then we have our pump storage. So we're just trying to show on this graph, a very simplistic graph, is that if these megawatts or gigawatts, so this capacity, if this capacity was all available, so if, for instance, theoretically, Eskom's energy availability factor was, 90% or 80% or something along those lines, as it was not that long ago, we wouldn't be in an electricity crisis. There is enough megawatts online, but the problem is that the reliability or the functionality of that Eskom fleet is significantly reduced. And that's the proxy used there is energy availability factor, which we'll show in some further slides. And then the VRE, which stands for Variable Renewable Energy. So our wind, CSP, and PV. So we know these things have come online, very successful IPP program since about 2010. So that is definitely helping with the crisis. Some people say, well, variable renewable energy is not going to get us out of the crisis. Well, if the crisis was just a capacity crisis, then yeah, mostly it wouldn't be having much of an impact. But we're also in an energy crisis. So every megawatt and every megawatt hour that's being generated is helping reduce the crisis. So again, this is what we're showing here is now terawatt hours. So this is from an energy point of view from 2010 to 2022. I know there's a lot of information, but what's mainly things that may help you sort of focus on is that the total number at the top here is what the national demand is in terms of terawatt hours, around about 250, 10, 12 years ago. And that's been slowly reducing. So this is what the utility needs to provide. So this is not the total demand, but this is what Eskom needs to provide. So this is what Eskom needs to plan for. And we're seeing sort of a slow decline. But the problem is the decline that we've seen with coal, so this dark brown that you're seeing here, is significantly more than the decline in demand. So 220 down to 177. So even though in theory we have more megawatts of coal online, but the availability to actually generate electricity is significantly reduced, and we're seeing quite a big step change here from 185 terawatt hours down to 177 in 2022. And this is one of the bigger reasons why we saw this sort of hatch that you're seeing over here is DSR, demand side response, or manual load reduction, or otherwise known as load shedding. So this 185 to 177, that sort of gap that's being left there by coal is being filled up by demand side response. The next slide is just looking at the same information, just taking out coal. So we're just seeing, well, if coal is reducing, how are we doing with non-coal generation? Is that gap that coal is leaving being filled with the others? And to some degree, we see that there has been an increase, and this is mostly from wind and PV, a little bit of CSP. Sorry, just hearing some feedback there. Can I continue? Okay, I'm going to continue. So again, thankfully, we should be very grateful for the IPPs in terms of wind and solar PV has helped us out here. But there's not much more that we can do in terms of our nuclear and our imports. Everything has kind of been maxed out, especially even our diesel, which is supposed to be running, a 2 or 3% capacity factor, currently running at around about 12%. So that was looking at from 2010 to 2022. So we're just going to take a snapshot for the same information, but now from in just last year, from January down to December. And we're seeing the same trend that we saw on an annual scale, now on a monthly scale, where from January down to December, again, a decrease in the amount of coal, that's the amount of electricity that's coming from coal. And this has just got to do with the reduced availability of the ESCOM fleet, or the coal power station specifically. So every time we're seeing this kind of reduction that you're seeing here, for instance, from November to December, that's being filled up with DSR or load shedding. So how did we get here? Why is we've got these megawatts, but why are we not able to generate enough electricity to cover the peak and to cover the energy demands? Well, the short story is that the declining EAF, or energy availability factor, which I mentioned earlier, is a useful metric to say what is the functionality of this ESCOM fleet. So, you have 10 cars. Of those 10 cars, and if you had a car rental place, how much of them are actually available at all times? Or so what can we actually rely on, when we want to do marketing or whatever? Can we say we've got 10 cars? Well, if you've only got half of them available at the time, then you've only got 5 cars essentially. And that's what we're seeing. The same thing with ESCOM, and this is going not as far back, but 2016, but 2017, the energy availability factor wasn't much below 80%. Go back another 10 years, we're above 90%. Some of the best performing fleets in the world. The ESCOM supply industry, or the ESCOM fleet, was really internationally well known and recognized as a top performing fleet. Unfortunately, there's been a general and steady decline with the years, and we're seeing this 2017 down to 2021, so just above 60%, and then for the first time dropping on an annual basis to below 60% at 58.1%, and even sort of new lows that we saw last year, December, the first time that we've seen a weekly low below 50%. So really is of concern. So as mentioned earlier, there's the 2 different components to maintenance. What we're showing here in the blue. So this is the probability of the different types of maintenance, planned versus unplanned. So blue is planned. The unplanned is this kind of pink. And then what we're showing here is the different years, 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22. So in 2018, the planned maintenance and unplanned maintenance wasn't too different. It's a little bit more unplanned maintenance or breakdowns. But with time, we're seeing that the planned maintenance is staying roughly the same at sort of 10% overall. But we're seeing a concerning trend to the right with the unplanned. So our breakdowns are increasing. In 2021, we actually saw this kind of split between the two, and this has increased in 2022. So again, we have this problem where the ESCOM fleet is being, we're sweating the assets, which is again this reinforcing loop that was mentioned earlier, is causing a capacity shortage. We're sweating assets. We've got inadequate or not enough maintenance, increased breakdowns. We've got aging power stations. So we're just seeing this increase in unplanned maintenance or breakdowns, which is in reducing the availability, which is worsening the crisis, which is reinforcing. So now to actually get to what the title was around this presentation, around the load shedding. So again, what we're showing here is load shedding. What we're seeing is in gigawatt hours, or you could say this is 12 terawatt hours. In 2007, 2008, we didn't actually have a way to classify load shedding. So these were unknown stages. 2014, 2015, we had what you could almost call it an oopsies year, which was very big. And we spoke about in 2014 about the electricity crisis. But just this graph is just clearly showing since 2018, we've had a sort of almost an exponential growth that we're seeing here, and a significant step change from 2021 to 2022. We're looking at more than sort of 4.5 times the amount of load shedding that we had in 2021 and 2022. So last year was by far the most load shedding intensive year that we've had. And also, what's other thing that's concerning is that before, it was on average, most of the load shedding happened in stage 2. But in 2022, the most prevalent stage of load shedding was actually stage 4. We're seeing this 3,824 stage 4 versus 2,856, so significantly more. And then, as we did before, we're also going to look at it from last year, so that was on an annual basis. Now we're looking at just in 2010. We're seeing again a lot of information in terms of the different stages. I think a good summary of how this is looking is that we know in the second half of the year, so from July to December, more than 80% of the load shedding occurred for the entire year. So up until June last year wasn't that bad. It was following kind of similar trends. It was a bit more than previous years, but since July, things have gotten as the amount of load shedding has increased significantly. So the last slide around this is the question is, so we've seen this trend in terms of declining energy availability factor. And the question we get asked quite often at the energy systems or at the CSIR is, when are we going to see a turnaround? When's load shedding going to end? I think there's two sort of metrics that should be looked at closely to say, well, if this is giving an indication if we're nearing the end of load shedding or not. I think the first one is to say, well, have we reached a turnaround point around the energy availability factor? And just looking at this graph, this is still sort of what they would call investing a falling knife. You don't want to catch a falling knife. You need to first see, well, when does it start stabilizing? And unfortunately, from January and February, we know in our personal lives, right now I'm in load shedding, that things have not improved. So the question is, how much further are we going to go down? So once we can see the energy availability factor stabilize and then start to improve, that'll be a good sign for things improving and load shedding, potentially coming to an end. The other metric that would be interesting to look at, or it's relevant to look at, is to say, well, are megawatts being procured? Are we actually seeing generation capacity being connected to the grid and starting to generate electricity? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Warwick. Warwick Pierce is our principal researcher. So thank you so much for that presentation. So we will take questions after the next presentation. So the next presentation will look into how is this load shedding, affecting, the water supply in the country. So I would like to call upon Mr. Odwa Badi, who is our senior engineer, senior civil engineer, to take us through this presentation. I would like to also welcome all the journalists who are joining us now. Welcome. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions after this presentation. Over to you, Mr. Odwa.
Thank you very much, colleague. Just a second, colleagues, while I get the presentation. Okay. I hope I'm audible. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. Welcome to the public again, and my colleagues in the water center and in the water industry. My presentation is going to focus more on how my colleague Warwick's electricity presentation is going to feed into this within South Africa. How the presentation will unfold. Firstly, we'll have a look at how does energy or electricity mix with water? When is it needed? And then the second part, which we'd like to focus more on, is if this electricity is not there for the water needs, what happens? And how does the system react, and who is affected when we don't get this water, this electricity for water use? Lastly, which we also want to focus on as CSIR, is the different solutions that we provide for the various challenges in water supply. I think it's firstly important for us to discuss the relevance of the topic. Why is it important for us to understand that electricity is needed for water supply? I think the most important and the constitutional mandate that we have, which is captured very well under Section 27, 1B of the Constitution, that everyone has the right to access to safe water. And I think we should all, as Water Service Authority, aspire to that. And then other relevant information that we have, which was, which was captured by the Department of Water and Sanitation Master Plan, very well, which the Master Plan was published, I think, in 2020, where they indicate 64% of the households in South Africa have access to a reliable water source. The inverse of that, which means is approximately 36% of South Africans do not have access to a reliable water source. Then we also look at how do we use water as South Africans. If you look at the graph in the middle, agriculture takes about 61% of the water use that we need in South Africa. And then with municipality, that is residents and also commercial and businesses that need that water for 27%. So holistically speaking, the biggest contributors, which is 89%, is both agriculture and and municipal demand. And agriculture, that's why it's important for us to pay attention to this topic. Agriculture, we are speaking about our food security. And within the municipal space, then we are speaking about the loss of economic activities where other industries need water to do this, to run their businesses. So lastly, just to paint a picture of this relevance, in the master plan, it does indicate for us to meet our SDG goals, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, to 2030. That goal is to allow everyone in South Africa to get access to water and safe drinking water. Currently, or from 2020, when the master plan was published, is that we would have a deficit of 17% in water availability in 2030 if we don't do anything. If we don't do anything about the current situation and rapid urbanization within our cities. And this translated to then a gap where we will get funding as South Africans to address these water shortages. And then the gap that has already been identified is that we will need approximately 33 billion a year for the next 10 years to resolve that deficit that we need. I think then the first part, where does then electricity is required within water? So what we are talking about here is, more often than not, is the river source, the water source is usually at the rivers. And how our communities are geographically positioned is that we sit at an elevated height compared to the water source. So the unfortunate part is the water can't walk up the hill. So now we need an energy source to get it up to the consumers and to the agricultural space where it's needed. So pumping is required in the space. Then pumping, what happens then if we don't have the necessary pumping? As I initially indicated, we won't be able to address our constitutional mandate. We will get economic loss. Some businesses will close because they really need the water that we supply to them as a community. Then lastly, if we address the pumping, the pump is an infrastructure in getting the water to a reservoir. Now, should that pump be without electricity, or it happens the way it has been happening within South Africa with the load shedding, where the electricity trips, a number of things can happen to that infrastructure, which is the pump itself. which is responsible for sending water to the reservoirs and supply water to consumers. So you can get an electricity surge, and you can get a water surge, which is a water hammer. An electricity surge, in my experience, what I've seen can happen with, I'll make an example of a 15 kilowatt pump. Where an electricity surge happened, the damage that happened to that pump or pump station as a whole, the infrastructure there, was approximately 70,000 in an instant. So I think that gives us perspective on how much we're also losing as South Africans if we don't protect against these electric surges. If we look at the hydraulic surge and the water surges, that is when we have to look at the appropriate designs that need to happen within our water industry, as we need air valves before a certain pump. What that does, it then protects the pump itself when electricity goes off, because you will have a column of water trying to come back at a high velocity to hit back at the pump. So you're trying to protect against that if you do appropriate designs, and you put the air valves in. Then if I can go over for the second reason where electricity is needed in water, it is safety and security. I think some of us might not be thinking that safety and security is really required in electricity in water reservoirs. However, this is an important thing. In water reservoirs, some of them are very isolated in position to the community. Now, with that isolation, it's at a risk of being vandalized, the reservoir. So that's why you need lighting and adequate electricity for the instrumentation that go in there, and so that you can have appropriate security personnel for that infrastructure, for a very important infrastructure called the reservoirs. In this, another added negative effect, if we do not get water within our water pipelines and distribution center, if the water runs dry, we are currently going into the winter season, and emergency services need that water. And when a fire happens, the emergency service and firefighting capabilities, they come and plug into the distribution system, water distribution system. And if there's no water while they are trying to switch off a fire, that might cause devastating effects to that property or that developer that is affected by that fire. I think we go then to the last part, which I previously just briefly touched on, which is automated instrumentation, electricity within our reservoir sites. We also need electricity for the instrumentation. The instrumentation assists us with measuring the water levels and maintaining those water levels. Why is that? We need to ensure that the reservoirs do not overflow into adjacent properties of the reservoir, where the municipalities might be at risk of getting claims because of damage to property. So this instrumentation is very important. And if we do not get the necessary electricity for this instrumentation, the water does overflow. Number two is we are not able also to observe our minimum night flow. Our minimum night flow is very important for us to work our water supply, water infrastructure very efficiently. So those are the things that we are trying to minimize to save water within South Africa. If I can move on, then allow me just to take you through where a surge happened, electricity surge happened in my previous experience. And these were the results of the reservoirs, the reservoir levels, which went down, and how they went up when the pump was inevitably fixed. So if I can make a few examples, I think I'll start with the 3.5 megaliter reservoir that you see there and the tower. That 3.5 megaliter reservoir and the tower is that green line that you will see. Now, what had happened there, you can see at 35 to 36 hours, the pump tripped. And now the officials, municipal officials, need to go and fix this pipe. The unfortunate part is now there is no pumping happening because the pump tripped because of an electricity surge. So if we observe the 3.5 megaliter reservoir, it went down from 80% to 50% within 12 hours. If we observe the graph that we see there, then again from 20%, from 50% to 20% within another 12 hours. This is according to the human settlement guidelines. Is that when there is no water supply to a reservoir, there should be at least 24-hour storage. Currently, this seems to meet those guidelines and those standards. And it went down the further 6 hours, from 20% to zero in 6 hours. Now, this indicated this stayed at a very low reservoir level for some time. And what happened in this case, maybe just to bring you the perspective on how it affects South Africans. In this reservoir area, there are 1,560 households that are being supplied by this reservoir. There are 211 businesses and commercial stands within that reservoir zone. And the area is approximately 14 kilometers squared. Then if we make another example, I think let's choose a different example. Apologies. Let's choose a different example where we'll see how illegal connections play a role, rapid urbanization plays a role, water losses and water leaks and unaccounted water plays a role. If I take you through this example, if we look at the 20 megaliter reservoir, which is the lighter blue line within the graph, that seems to be the reservoir that got affected the most. And if we look at it, even it trying to replenish, it took a number of days to try and replenish. Now, what are the facts about that reservoir? It's a 20 megaliter reservoir. The reservoir took from 80% to 50%, 5 hours. From 50% to 20%, a very critical level, another 5 hours. That is 10 hours, which that is not sufficient. And I must indicate that depending on the elevation and how the community is structured geographically, at approximately those 50%, 60%, the high-lying areas start not getting water from this reservoir. And if you look then, if I go further from 20% to 0%, it took another 5 hours, which holistically took approximately 15 hours to get from a top level to zero level. And I say top level, I will justify now because it started at 80%. So this then shows a bigger picture or paints a proper picture on why the reservoir also can't get to 100%. The household in the area are 43,900 households that we have in that distribution zone. 123 businesses and commercial land uses. The consumption in that area is 21 megaliters. And let's stop a bit there. The size of the reservoir is 20 megaliters, and the consumption is 21 megaliters. Already the consumption is more than the storage volume itself. And we're now not talking about, because when you are designing and planning for a reservoir, there are certain and different capacities that you need to plan for. There's the firefighting, which I previously mentioned. That quantity needs to be there all the time so that firefighting can happen at any time. In this case, it shows that this 20 megaliter reservoir might be in trouble if a pump goes down. And I think another added effect where I indicate about illegal connections, the metered connections in this distribution zone are only sitting at 65%, meaning an entire 35% of water is not metered, we are not sure where it is going in this distribution zone. I think it was important just to take you through what happens when a pump fails and how the reservoirs go down and run dry within different distribution zones. There are different examples also there. I think in the interest of time, I'll just stick to elaborating on those. I think the more important thing is for us to elaborate on the solution. We as South Africans are, I think we cannot dispute, we are in trouble in terms of water supply, in terms of electricity supply. I think it's important then for us to be focused at coming together and discussing more solutions on how we can mitigate this. So as it currently stands, according to the Department of Water and Sanitation Master Plan, we were sitting at 41% non-revenue water, and of this, 35% is through water leaks. So we need to do something about this. And to give you a perspective on the water that we're losing from this non-revenue water, it's estimated at 1,660 million cubic meters a year that we are losing through these water leaks. And then if we then go to the money that's related to these water leaks, that is an approximate 9.9 billion rand a year that we are losing that can be used somewhere or to assist in our water infrastructure. And this 9.9 billion per year was calculated using a water tariff rate of 6 rand per cube, which has gone up now. I think if I stand corrected, it's approximately 8 to 10 rand per cube now. So if we continue in this path, we're going to be losing more money. And I think this is money that we as South Africans can use. So some of the solutions that we look at CSIR, we deal with a number of solutions for the industry, for water and wastewater infrastructure use, and also monitor water use, so we can also monitor the efficiency on how water is used. So at the CSIR, we do have a CARS app. This CARS app is mainly focused at reporting incidents of water and wastewater infrastructure. When you see that sanitation leak, when you see that pipe leak, unfortunately, currently, in many of our municipalities, they don't have sufficient instrumentation to put on the ground to be able to see these water leaks. And that's what CSIR helps them with. So we create such apps. Then secondly, also, we do help assist within farmers, trying to assist them in their water use, because irrigation, as you saw, takes 61% of our water consumption. So if we can reduce that, that will be a great benefit to South Africans. So farmers can look at something like the drip system, and at CSIR, we are assisting them to see how different trees and different plants, we're doing research with them, different trees and plants actually consume water, so that you don't irrigate and the plants actually does not need water, and water just evaporates, is lost to the environment. So those are the different technologies that CSIR also can get into. The other solutions I think we need to then focus on is the hydropower. There are solutions like the hydropower that we can implement. I think on the next slide, I'll dive deeper on in terms of hydropower, biogas, ocean wave technology generation, wind and solar. I think biogas, I would have loved to expand more on that, but I have colleagues that are dealing with that, with the biogas, that are teaching me. I'm learning new things as we go at CSR. They're doing a beautiful job in trying to get biogas from wastewater to be able to get electricity for maybe the wastewater treatment plant. Now, another solution that can be implemented, we talked about pumps. A pump can be operated in many ways. And the new ways that we are proposing is variable speed drives. These variable speed drives, what they do is, if I could make an analogy or an example, when you get into certain spaces or into certain rooms, some of the lights are usually off, but when you get in, they start going on. When you get out, after some time, those lights go off. Now, those lights are very, let me not say very, they are energy efficient because they use water, they use electricity when needed. So this is the same concept with variable speed drive with VSDs. When water is needed during peak time, it will work more. It will use electricity more. When water is not required during the off-peak times, it will use less electricity. So that would be a benefit for energy use. And the next thing, sorry for that. Then some of the technologies, the smart water management system that we can use, and I briefly touched on what CSIR does that. We have a team also of smart water use. They are doing wonderful things. They are the ones also working with farmers under the water center. So yeah, I'll also just give you a few examples of these smart management devices that can be used. And then we can also implement water reuse measures. Our partners, the government and research partners, last year, I think it's the WRC and the university and IMESA published the reclamation and reuse guidelines for South Africa. That was last year in 2022. So what is required now is for us to campaign for those guidelines to be used. Where farmers can use it, they should use it. Where mines can use it and reuse their water, they can use it also, those guidelines. Okay, as I indicated, I'll be going a bit deeper in terms of hydropower. Now, in terms of hydropower, I'd just like to mention something very small that we captured in the International Energy Agency report, which allows South Africa to be able to use these different energy mixes, whether it's fuel, whether it's biogas, whether it be hydropower, in all of them that we can use to solve our solutions. So what the International Energy Agency reports, the Africa Energy Outlook in 2014, they estimated that sub-Saharan Africa will contribute about 3% of the carbon emissions in 2040. So that's not even now. So in 2040. So for us, I think this allows then for us to be able to tap into the different energy sources to get electricity for our water use. So if I can go deeper with hydropower, briefly explain it. Hydropower is basically using the natural water stream or the water that's within the pipe. You put a turbine in line of that water stream as it's flowing. That turbine turns and generates electricity. So basically that's hydropower. And we do need to pay attention to a number of things when we're working with hydropower. If we are going to talk about rivers, we're going to have to talk about environmental laws. We're going to have to talk about how we're affecting the river flow. And I believe as we are trying to sort out this water crisis as South Africans, the environmental colleagues will be working with the water colleagues for us to solve these things. So that's the parts. Then if I may quickly take you through a study, I'll briefly mention through a study which was done in 2016 by University of Pretoria and the Water Research Commission, where they discovered the research was done in Kwamadiba community, rural community within South Africa. And what they were looking at the comparative costs in terms of providing electricity to different communities. So, and if you look at the results that they have here, and they rate them according to the operational life years, where they looked at the comparison. If you look at the blue line, it represents hydropower, small-scale hydropower plant. The red line, it represents the grid, where Eskom will be trying to put transmission lines to the community, then distribution power lines to give the community electricity. Then the last one is diesel operated infrastructure, like a generator, for instance, to give them electricity. And if you look at those comparative costs, hydropower wins all the time in terms of cost comparison. So meaning we can benefit from hydropower by using a bit less money, a bit less money than compared to other energy sources. So to take you further, remember I indicated about the smart water management systems or tools that we can use. So currently, the world average of water consumption is sitting at 173 liters per person per day. However, we as South Africans are sitting at 237 liters per person per day. This can be attributed to that 41% non-revenue water, where we don't know who the water is, and also the rapid urbanization. And in trying to solve those solutions, I mentioned the VSD and how it works. Then also you have aerators that you can use. Aerators have been recorded, they can save at least up to 30% of the water that you use in the taps, and they can be retrofitted. So we need to look at this. Then to address night flows, we can put PRVs where there's too much pressure to minimize the leaks within the system. Then the toilet, I think that picture that we put there, we need to look at our individuals as South African, our individual homes where leaks happen, where that toilet that is leaking and we leave and we think it's not too much leak. As combined contribution, that leak is big. So we need to address individually those leaks. Yeah, then thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I think now is the perfect time to take questions to our speakers. I would like to start with the questions online. If there are any questions online, my colleagues will indicate, okay, there's nothing so far. So I would like to give an opportunity to those who are joining us virtually to start with the questions, and then we'll come back to those who are here with us in the room. So please, you can unmute yourself and indicate the media house that you're coming from, and then direct the question to the speakers. Thank you. I'm not sure if there are questions because I can't see. Let me just remove this. Okay, please go ahead. I just want to. William, I see your hand. Please go ahead. Not sure if you are muted because I can't hear you. Is William still there? I think we have lost him. Any other questions? Okay, please.
There's a question from Christelle. How long will our water infrastructure still withstand continuous and high phases of load shedding? And that's from Marula Media.
Please repeat that, Lindy.
Yes, it's in the chat.
Thank you, Crystal. We'll address that. Any other question? Don't see any hands from the colleagues who are joining us online. Any questions from the room? We've got Stumo from SABC. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is for Warwick PS.
Okay.
I had mentioned that the energy availability factor is actually relative because the megawatts on the system does not reflect the megawatts that are supposed to be there. Basically, stating that the megawatts on the system are sufficient to carry us without getting load shedding. But I'd like to know, does it attribute this wholeheartedly to the reduction in the coal that's been used over the years to generate energy, or what other factors are actually contributing to this declining energy availability factor?
Warwick, please just indicate if you are able to hear us.
Yeah, I heard the question. I'm happy to address it.
All right, let's take more other questions before you respond to that. Okay, Warwick, I think you can go ahead and answer the question from Stumo, SABC. Thank you.
So the energy availability factor, how it's calculated is you start with 100% and you say, well, so it's 100% minus any of your planned maintenance, minus your unplanned maintenance, minus your what they call sort of other maintenance, which is civil unrest and the like, which is a very small number, around about 1.5%. So the energy availability factor is, roughly, so last year was 58%. That's mostly got to do with the increase in the unplanned outages, so the breakdowns that we spoke about earlier. So before you saw those graphs, the blue and the sort of the orange shifting apart from each other with a significant increase in unplanned. But further to your question, yes, it's correct. If our energy availability factor was sort of in the area of say 75-80%, where it's previously been, and even higher than that, we would not necessarily be in an electricity crisis. So that's sort of the hard pill to swallow with the current load shedding.
Thank you, Warwick. While you're still there, I think there's a question from William on the chat as well. I think William would like to know, he's from the Daily Inventor, he would like to know, how does the EAF of older power plants compared to EAF? Apologies for that. Okay, EAF plants of power plants built more recently.
So you would expect your functionality of your newer plants to be a lot better, and that's obviously new things work better. That's fairly common knowledge. The short answer is we don't have the different power plants. We have the data provided by Eskom, which is per technology or generation technology. So we see coal or thermal power station, as they call it, as a group. But in short, we can say that we know, for instance, Kusile and Medupi should be, sort of 80-90% availability. But we know that that's not true. Unfortunately, the output for Kusile and Medupi is significantly less than what it should be. But yeah, in general, your functionality of your newer plants should be better. And that's why I mentioned that we've got sort of two parts here. We've got the sweat the assets. We're trying to avoid load shedding, trying to keep the lights on. So that's sort of a reduced or maybe inadequate maintenance. But then you've also got the significant age of the fleet. So the coal power stations, like we saw with that mountain, we're sort of on the other side of the mountain now, where a lot of power stations are coming or need to be decommissioned.
Okay, thank you, Warwick. I think we're gonna hand over now to Odwa just to tackle some few questions. I think there are also questions in the chat that will also, give them to you. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Questions that I got: how long will our infrastructure withstand the constant load shedding? I think What is important to mention there, our infrastructure is having a negative, a knock. There's a negative effect on our infrastructure because our infrastructure usually would have to work in a static condition where supply is sustained and constant to a certain extent. For example, when I showed the graph of the reservoir that went to zero, at a reservoir, the lower section of bottom section of the reservoir, that's where sediments sit at a reservoir. So that last 5 to 10% is really not supposed to be used and going to people. So now what happens is when it's on and off, you are more supplying those sediments, you transporting them to the community when that happens. So we need to, our supply needs to be a bit more constant. Then secondly is, I think we're well aware that maintenance has not been focused on previously. So now when you have infrastructure that has not been focused on maintenance and it deteriorates at a faster rate, having that effect of on and off of working of infrastructure also deteriorates the infrastructure much faster. What if in this question, if maybe you were looking at the quantity on how long how our infrastructure can last, I think on this we are currently negotiating and engaging our partners and our government partners to do a study on some of the municipalities, or all if possible, in terms of the impact, the numbers that we can then see that are happening currently. Question number 2, feasibility of hydropower. Hydropower is case-by-case basis. And in terms of Gauteng, I think the type of hydropower that will be used is the kinetic hydropower, where you use existing infrastructure where to put the turbine and create a space for a turbine with the existing infrastructure, whether you have 600 millimeter pipelines, 450 millimeter pipelines, that is doable. And in my experience, now I can't mention unfortunately the area because we're still engaging with our partners in this, where they had approximately 194 reservoirs, and the potential there within electricity that could be generated was sitting at 6,000 megawatts of electricity that could be generated. So there is a potential. There is a potential, and why is it not implemented? This one I think is a combination of a number of things. I think our engineers, our scientists need to be given the platform to exercise their profession. And at times that doesn't come forward. So when we get the right people to the job, I think these solutions can be implemented successfully. And then the last one, second last one, farmers, how does this load shedding affect? How is it a problem to farmers? The one thing that I didn't mention in my speech, but I wrote in my presentation, I wrote reservoirs and I wrote boreholes. I think in this, we need to also get boreholes and underground catchment areas. We can phrase them as reservoirs because the formal word is aquifer. But in this case, it's because the farmers depend on that borehole water and many rural areas depend on that borehole water. I think in the context of this presentation, it plays the same role as a reservoir. So farmers, I would say 100% of the time would need electricity because the water source is at the bottom of the ground and needs to come above ground. So in that case, I think they get affected very heavily in terms of in terms of these energy cuts. Let me stop there with that. Then the last question, why can a reservoir not reach 100%? I think on this one, I apologize if I did indicate that. It is not that a reservoir cannot reach 100%. As I indicated in the presentation, a reservoir can overflow. So it has reached more than 100%. I think I was making in particular the reservoir, the 20 megaliter reservoir, I was making an example of. And that example, I was indicating why it's not getting to 100%, because the consumption of the distribution area is larger than the storage itself of the reservoir. So I think that would be the reason. Okay, thank you. I don't know if there are other questions.
You can just here. Just okay. Okay. We'll have another question. Warwick, you will come in quickly. I think we have a question for Odwa. Just a sec. Here in the room. Please go ahead, Stu.
Thank you very much. Odwa, I'd like to mention that we are actually using about 9.9 billion in terms of the non-revenue water.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know, when you mentioned the issue of electricity, lack of electricity, failing to pump the water upwards, how does that exacerbate the situation of the non-revenue water, the issue of electricity not being able to pump the waters to the desired levels of the reservoirs?
Okay, in terms of how do we, I'm going to try and rephrase your question. So how does pumping not having electricity to pump, how does it affect or include into the non-revenue water? In this case, those two would not meet. The non-revenue water, I was talking in the sense where we assisting the electricity situation, because as water engineers, we can assist in using our water efficiently. Because if we're throwing away 35%, which is the water losses, if we withheld and did not throw away that 35%, we would have less water to pump. Or let me not say less water to pump, maybe at regular intervals to pump, because now we are basically pumping for the people to consume, for industries to consume, and for the leaks to consume. But if you plug the leaks, you don't need to pump for the leaks. So that's how they assist each other. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Odwa. Warwick, please come in. There are lots of questions in the chat for you. If you could respond to all of them. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So I see there's Christelle, which asks, why is electricity capacity not improving despite Eskom claiming to do massive maintenance? So Christelle, even with so maintenance wouldn't increase the capacity, it would increase the availability. So I mean, it's a bit of a terminology difference there, but we know when you're doing maintenance planned, or even if it's unplanned, it means that system has to be offline. So by doing maintenance, it's that unit is not available, so therefore we would see an increase in load shedding. And this is the really tough situation that Eskom is in, is because they know they need to do maintenance because their fleet is not particularly healthy, but they know they need to keep the lights on. So it's always this balancing act, and I think the system operator and Eskom overall is really having a tough time, but they're doing a good job of us, making sure that the system is stable. Then I see a question from Duncan. Duncan's question, sort of quite a good observation, is can the step change worsening in the load shedding crisis from July 2022 be ascribed to the decline in EAF alone? Why did the crisis escalate so rapidly from mid-2022? So I think there's numerous factors there again, and that's I agree with you. We can't just ascribe it to one metric. That would be one-dimensional thinking. There's other factors that come into play. It could be like which units are offline. But I think what it's showing is that we really are quite at the edge. And that's what we're saying, that, Eskom is trying to sort of push along, and that's what we saw from, say, January to June, and getting it right most of the time. And maybe there was some delayed maintenance just to keep the lights on. And at some point, you got to say, well, we can't keep on delaying maintenance. We have to do this maintenance. We can't keep on just burning diesel. It's extremely expensive. So we're going to have to start load shedding. Obviously, so we know in December we had Kuberg unit go offline, so therefore could be attributed to the significant. So December last year was the highest month of load shedding on ever. And December on its own was more than any previous year. So just the load shedding we had last year, December, was more than 2021, which was the previous highest amount. And then I see there's a question from YouTube. In case of stage 8 to total shutdown, would there be any backup for the country? So I think it's important to understand that load shedding is a emergency response. I know we it's, as I've mentioned, I'm currently in load shedding. It's an everyday event, sometimes 2 to 3 times that it's happening. That we need to, as South African citizens, we need to understand that this is an emergency response, and the reason why load shedding is happening is because supply is not able to meet demand, which would cause instabilities, which would then essentially might lead to a total shutdown, which is what sort of a real blackout. The system operator drops demand, not voluntarily but manually, so it forces demand to be dropped, which is what we're seeing with the different parts of the country get on load shedding, or different municipalities. So that was done. If it's stage 4 for stage 8, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily any closer to a total blackout. It just means that the gap between supply and demand is getting worse. So I don't think if we move, for instance, if we're trying to limit, Eskom is trying to limit to stage 8. If we move to stage 6, sorry. So currently Eskom is trying to limit load shedding to stage 6. If we move to stage 8, which may or may not come in the winter months of this year, it doesn't mean that we're closer to a total blackout or total system shutdown. So I just want to give some people comfort there, that a higher stage doesn't mean it means that the gap is getting worse, but it doesn't mean that we're necessarily getting closer to a total shutdown. I think the system operator and Eskom is very well versed, and has systems in place to make sure we don't get there.
Okay, Warwick, I think there are other questions. Let me just scroll up. Not sure if you have answered to Duncan's question.
Yeah, I think I discussed the step change. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, I think there are some for Odwa. We'll invite you back to the podium. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you again for the additional questions. I think one I take is if hydropower is a bit cheaper, why is it not being utilized? Is it lack of political will? Honestly, I think you might have partially responded to the question, and how our institutions have been placed. Where I think one example, and I'm also not going to mention any municipality, there is approximately 45% vacancy rate within technical services in operation and maintenance of that certain municipality. So with municipalities not prioritizing then these skills within their structure, that might a bit answer the question as you indicate. Yeah, let me leave that question there. That answer there. I think from Lendine, isn't it time for us to normalize boiling water? On this one, I am not a water treatment or wastewater treatment specialist. I do have colleagues that I work close with, that are we in the same center that deal with that. In saying that, I don't have the bigger picture on my side. They would, my colleagues would. I don't have the bigger picture on my side, and what is the deteriorating effect on the quality of water. So I wouldn't jump the gun and say South Africans need to boil water. We are working with different municipalities to give them the capability. We also do capability building in the water center at CSIR to give them the capability to treat their water, to test and monitor the different water quality so that it does comply with our standards, the SANS 241 standards for potable drinking water. So I will, from my side, I wouldn't jump the gun. And also, I'm not deeply immersed in that space of treatment, more in conveyance of water. And then, is there another one? Elevation, costly. I think what makes, the question was asking, given South Africa is a high elevation area, it is costly for South African relatively to pump and to distribute water. I think where we are required to pump, we are using electricity currently. And we all know that electricity is getting much expensive and expensive and expensive. So it's starting to become unsustainable for us to be using one energy source to be able to pump this water. The unfortunate part is we are located where we are located. We have to pump where we need to pump. But yes, you are truly correct. It does become relatively expensive because of the pumping, because of the energy source. Then we need transmission lines and distribution lines to go to that pump station. And you know, then the added effect with a growing unemployment rate and poverty, then those lines that are in those pump stations become very vulnerable at risk of being stolen, theft, and vandalized. So yeah, then it becomes quite expensive for pumping. Thanks.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I'm not sure if there are other questions. While we are checking the chat, let me invite colleagues in the room if you have any other questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Schumacher and CBC Radio. I just want to get your understanding about illegal connection or power supply grid. Most of the time when we experience this load shedding, the focus is more on the people who are actually illegally connected. Although those who are illegally connected are also affected when power is faulted. But now what I want to understand is how much power is stolen through this illegal connection, and how far is it impacting on our power supply system?
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I think that question is directed to Warwick.
I think, in short, we don't have, or I don't have personally have information on the amount of illegal connections. I know, having worked with quite a few municipalities, I know it can be quite a significant amount. It's classified as non-technical losses. But what I think is, and it's another impact of load shedding, is that the amount of theft of just cables has increased significantly. You know, we know, speaking with municipalities, that Thieves are using load shedding as an opportunity to go and cut cables and to steal it. So again, load shedding has really just got a lot of problems that it's bringing with it. So we really have to make a concerted effort to get out of load shedding.
Okay, thank you. While you're there, I think there's a question from Cindy. I'm not sure if you have touched on that.
Yeah, I see it. I always try to avoid it. When could we see an end to load shedding? I think it's not necessarily about trying to look into a crystal ball and say when's the end going to be. I think it's like I've said at the end of the presentation, is I think two key metrics to look at. One is, when is there going to be a turnaround? When are we at least going to see a stabilization of the energy availability factor? So the functionality of the ESCOM fleet stabilize, not get worse. I spoke about it previously as saying we've got a bucket with a lot of holes in it. We need to fill the bucket up, but the starting point is to say, well, let's start, covering some of these holes. So when we can see that stabilizing, when we can see it increasing, and then the other other metric would be, so when are we going to start seeing some significant amount of megawatts being connected to the grid? I would say that then, and even when we see that, it will be quite a few years later when we come to an end of load shedding. So I think the question right now is not when is the end of load shedding. The question is, can we keep load shedding to a level of stage 6? But I know you're trying to get some sort of question. I would say we're at least in this for quite a few more years of load shedding.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. Any other question before we close the session? Colleagues who are joining us online, do we have any hands? I don't see any. Okay, in the room? All good? All right. Thank you very much. I think then this brings us to the end of this session. I would like to thank all members of the media who have joined us this morning. Our experts are available for post-media interviews. So please do reach us to our office so that we can then link you with our expert. I see there's a question. Is it at the back? The chat. Okay, please. I think they can hear you. Please go ahead.
The question is, how can we stop the issue of vandalism at our reservoirs?
Okay, so that is directed to Odwa. Okay, right.
Stopping vandalism, theft, and stripping in our reservoirs. I think the one and the obvious one is to have security within our reservoir. I know there's a couple of criteria that security need that to be placed within a reservoir site. I think one of them, there has to be lighting, there has to be ablution facilities, such things. So security is part of it. Then number two, how we can stop it is choosing the different type of material to use. Instead of in our reservoirs, also vandalism and theft, what happens is our steel cover, manhole covers get stolen because they are steel is money. The ladders get stolen. So, and they get cut at times. But if you use different fiber reinforced ladders or gratings within on top of our chambers, currently such material has zero street value, and it is used in industry. It's also used in manufacturing plants where harsh chemicals, they operate with harsh chemicals. So if we change also, or we consider, and we consider our options and the different materials that we can use, I think that will greatly assist.
Yeah, there's another question for you. The question was not answered from Mandile.
Bandile, could you elaborate on SA's general water availability? I think, as I indicated, the availability, I think also our Minister of Water and Sanitation came out last year indicating that there is no crisis in terms of availability. We do have water availability currently in South Africa. More studies also, I would propose, need to be done on our underground water sources in terms of how much we can extract. I think such studies in particular areas have been lacking a bit. For me, it's one of my passion also. I would love to get into that study where I think I'll be doing my master's and PhD in it, where I'm looking on how we can use the underground water sources to capture water there. Because as South Africa, we are a semi-arid region, quite a hot region. So evaporation kills our water source, our water evaporates. So if we can make use of the either dolomitic or the catchment areas underground, I think there we can derive more water, but we need to be able to extract that water in a sustainable way and not collapse the underground water sources. Thing availability, and then between the seasons, the water. I think the question is, please differentiate between the seasons in terms of deficit. As I indicate, I don't think there is currently an availability problem. In between the seasons, what does get affected during summer, as during summer we get a lot of evaporation that we need to protect against. And there are various technologies that we can partner with also internationally in terms of to try and mitigate that evaporation issue. During the winter season, the issue with the borehole water now, where it's usually used in farming and in rural areas, the issue there is during the winter season, the water level, the aquifer level goes down a bit. And I think even there, we are working with different municipalities to assist them in understanding the sustainable withdrawal of water underground. So one thing maybe that you might be touching on in terms of deficit is that we need to be able to protect the underground water source because it might be polluted because of our operation and how we're working on the certain mining activities and also human activities. So in there, we need to be able to come up with appropriate guidelines. I think many of them are there currently in terms of addressing on where from a water source, underground water source, you can establish or you can discharge sanitation and all of that. So I don't know if it addressed your question. Thanks.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think this concludes our session for today. I would like to make this announcement that one of the purposes of this media briefing was also to release our annual statistics on power generation. So we will publish the report very soon. So we'll also share with you that report. So it will cover the load shedding stats from January 2022 up until December 2022. So we will share that with members of the media who are here today, and we'll also publish it on our website as well. If there are no further questions, let me close this session. Thank you so much. If you feel like you want to interview one of the speakers, please do indicate. We'll organize that for you. Thank you and have a lovely day further.